The morning sun cast long shadows across the main street of Clearwater, a dusty speck on the map that most Americans would never know existed. Cole Emmerson stood in front of his hardware store, sweeping the previous day's dust from the wooden porch with methodical precision. To anyone passing by, he was just another small-town business owner starting his day. Nothing about his weathered face or calloused hands would suggest he had once been among America's most elite soldiers. Cole paused his sweeping, eyes reflexively scanning the horizon as a distant vehicle approached. It was an old habit that 15 years in the Rangers had burned into his muscle memory, like the way he still woke at 0500 every morning or how he unconsciously noted exit points whenever he entered a room. The approaching truck belonged to Miguel Ortiz, a local rancher. Cole nodded a greeting as the truck slowed. "Morning, Mr. Emerson," Miguel called out. "Got those fence posts I ordered?" "All ready to go, Miguel." Cole leaned his broom against the wall. "And I told you, it's just Cole." The formality always amused him. In the Rangers, he had commanded men through firefights in Kandahar and led stealth operations along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Here in Clearwater, 6 miles from the Mexican border, he was just Mr. Emerson, the hardware store owner who could fix anything and knew exactly what gauge wire you needed for any job. Cole helped Miguel load the fence posts into his truck, lifting the heavy bundles with an ease that belied his 45 years. His body was lean and corded with muscle, not the bulky build of a gym-goer, but the functional strength of someone who had spent decades pushing his body to its limits. "Heard anything more about those strangers passing through?" Miguel asked quietly as they secured the load. Cole's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Nothing concrete. Just keep your eyes open, especially at night." As Miguel drove away, Cole's gaze drifted toward the distant mountains marking the border. The town of Clearwater, population 1,863, sat in the shadow of those mountains like a pawn on a chessboard, small, seemingly insignificant, but positioned in a way that made it valuable to the wrong people. Inside the hardware store, the familiar smell of metal, oil, and what brought Cole a sense of peace he'd never expected to find after a lifetime of war. The transition to civilian life had been harder than any mission he'd ever faced. For men like him, the challenge wasn't the violence they'd experienced, it was the absence of purpose that came after. Cole moved through the aisles, mentally cataloging inventory with the same precision he once used to account for his team's ammunition. Every shelf was organized with military efficiency, every tool in its designated place. The locals joked about his orderliness, but they appreciated knowing that if they needed a specific 3/8-inch bolt at 4:55 p.m., Cole would have it ready in seconds. Behind the counter, partially hidden beneath a stack of catalogs, lay a modified M1911 pistol, a veteran itself, having accompanied Cole through 3 tours in Iraq. In Clearwater, the weapon represented a contradiction he lived with daily, the peace he sought versus the readiness he couldn't abandon. The bell above the door jingled as Sheriff Wilson stepped inside. The sheriff, a former Navy man, carried himself with the confident posture of someone who had seen combat, but now preferred the simpler battles of small-town law enforcement. "Coffee's fresh," Cole said, nodding toward the pot he kept brewing for regular customers. Wilson poured himself a cup. "Appreciate it. Feels like I've been up since yesterday." He took a sip and lowered his voice. "Had to break up a fight at Riley's bar last night. 2 of those new workers from the construction crew south of town. Something's off about them, Cole. They don't talk like construction workers." Cole nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. "I'll keep my ears open." What Cole didn't say was that he'd already noted the new crew, had already observed their vehicle patterns, had already spotted the telltale bulges of concealed weapons. In another life, identifying such details might have led to a night operation with his ranger unit. In Clearwater, it simply meant another potential threat to monitor. The morning passed with the comfortable rhythm of small-town commerce. Mrs. Dawson needed light bulbs. The Peterson kids came in for nails for their treehouse project, looking at Cole with wide eyes. They'd heard whispered stories about his military past, exaggerated tales that had him single-handedly fighting off entire enemy battalions. Cole always met such looks with kindness and patience, gently redirecting their attention to their projects rather than his history. At noon, Cole locked up for his daily routine, a three-meal jog followed by lunch at Marla's diner. The physical regimen wasn't vanity, it was survival. He'd seen too many veterans let themselves go after service, their bodies becoming as soft as their reflexes. In a town increasingly showing signs of cartel interest, staying combat-ready wasn't paranoia, it was pragmatism. His running route took him along the town's perimeter, allowing him to note changes in the landscape while maintaining his fitness. Today, he spotted fresh tire tracks leading toward an abandoned ranch house 3 miles out, the third such observation this week. He filed the information away, adjusting his mental map of the area's changing dynamics. At Marla's, he took his usual corner table with its clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. Doc Martinez was already there, nursing a coffee and reading a medical journal. The former combat medic had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning home to become Clearwater's only physician. The usual? Marla called out as Cole entered. "Please," Cole replied, sliding into the seat across from Martinez. The doctor looked up, dark circles under his eyes. "Had to patch up Joey Wilson last night. Bar fight. The kid took a bottle to the head. Sheriff mentioned it. The new guys." Martinez nodded grimly. One of them said something about Joey's sister. "These aren't ordinary roughnecks, Cole. The way they moved when things escalated. They've had training." Cole absorbed this information without visible reaction, though his mind was already calculating possibilities, threat assessments, potential scenarios. This was how his brain had been rewired through years of combat operations. Constant vigilance masked behind a facade of normalcy. "How many now?" Cole asked quietly. "I've counted at least 15 new faces in the past month. Too many for the work they're supposedly doing." Marla arrived with Cole's lunch, a grilled chicken sandwich and ice water. She lingered a moment, lowering her voice. "My cousin over in Hartsville says they've had trouble. Men coming into town, buying up properties, threatening folks who won't sell. Started just like this, construction workers and new businesses." This wasn't news to Cole. The cartel's playbook for small-town infiltration was well established. Send in scouts disguised as laborers, identify vulnerable properties and businesses, apply pressure where needed, then gradually increase presence until the town became an operational hub. He'd seen similar tactics used by insurgent groups in Iraq, the slow, methodical subversion of local authority. After lunch, Cole made his way to the back room of his store where a ham radio sat on a small desk. This was his concession to modern technology, a way to maintain contact with a network of former military personnel scattered throughout the border region. They shared information, tracked patterns, and kept each other alert to developing situations. Ranger checking in, he spoke into the microphone, using his old call sign. "Any traffic?" The radio crackled. "Sandman here. Had movement along Route 16 last night. For vehicles, heavily loaded, heading north. Same models as last week." "Roger that. Anything make it to checkpoint?" "Negative. They diverted east before the border patrol station, likely using the old mining roads." Cole logged the information in a notebook, adding it to the growing pattern of unusual activity. If his suspicions were correct, the cartel was establishing a new corridor through Clearwater's sector, a dangerous development for the quiet town. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, including young Tyler James, whose father had been killed in Afghanistan during Cole's last deployment. The boy didn't know Cole had been there, had held his father as he died, had promised to look out for his family if he ever could. Now, Cole quietly honored that promise by employing Tyler part-time and teaching him practical skills. "Mr. Emerson, I finished organizing the back storeroom like you asked," Tyler reported. "Good work," Cole replied, handing him a small envelope with his day's pay. "Your mom still having trouble with that kitchen sink?" Tyler nodded. "The leak's getting worse. I'll stop by tomorrow morning and take a look. No charge." As evening approached, Cole began his closing routine, methodically checking inventory and securing the premises. Through the front windows, he noticed three unfamiliar men walking slowly past his store, studying the building with calculated interest. One made eye contact with Cole, holding his gaze a beat too long before moving on. Cole recognized the look, the cold appraisal of someone assessing a potential obstacle. He'd seen it in the eyes of Taliban fighters, insurgent leaders, and enemy combatants across multiple war zones. It was the look of someone deciding whether you needed to be removed. After locking up, Cole drove his pickup truck to the modest ranch house he'd inherited from his grandfather. The property sat on 20 acres of scrubland at the edge of town, offering both privacy and a tactical advantage. Clear sightlines in all directions and multiple approach routes that could be monitored. Inside, the house reflected the duality of Cole's existence. The living room held family photos and comfortable furniture, while a locked room off the hallway contained equipment that would raise eyebrows in most civilian homes: topographical maps of the surrounding 50 miles, communication gear, and a gun safe holding weapons he'd legally acquired since leaving service. Cole prepared a simple dinner and ate on his back porch, watching the sunset over the distant mountains. This quiet moment, with the desert cooling around him and the first stars appearing overhead, was what he had fought for all those years. The right for places like Clearwater to exist in peace, for people to live without fear. His radio crackled to life on the table beside him. "Ranger, this is Watchman. We've got a situation developing in Hartsville. Cartel just made their move. 3 businesses burned overnight after owners refused to sell. Sheriff there is in the hospital. Thought you should know. We might be next in line." Cole acknowledged the transmission, a cold certainty settling in his gut. The pattern was accelerating. Clearwater's turn was coming, perhaps sooner than anyone expected. Later that night, Cole sat at his kitchen table cleaning his firearms, a ritual that centered him as much as it maintained his equipment. His callous fingers moved with practiced efficiency, field stripping and reassembling each weapon with the muscle memory that came from thousands of repetitions. A sound outside, the faint crunch of gravel under tires, brought him instantly alert. He moved silently to the window, staying to one side as he'd been trained. A vehicle had pulled up at the end of his long driveway, lights off, engine running. After 30 seconds, it backed away and disappeared down the road. Reconnaissance. They were mapping his home, assessing his isolation and vulnerability. The cartel's advance team was doing their homework before making any moves. Cole continued his evening as if nothing had happened, but his mind had shifted into operational planning. He would need to alert the other veterans in town, establish communication protocols, identify defensive positions, and create contingency plans for civilian protection. As he prepared for bed, Cole opened his closet and pulled out an old footlocker from the back corner. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay his ranger tab and a collection of medals and commendations he never displayed. Beneath them was a worn leather-bound journal containing names, brothers lost in far-off deserts and mountains, men who had fought beside him and never made it home. Cole ran his fingers across the embossed ranger insignia. He had left that life behind, or so he'd thought. But as he listened to the night sounds of the desert, he recognized the familiar tension building inside him, the calm focus that preceded combat. Clearwater was his home now, these people his responsibility. If war was coming to this peaceful town, the cartel would discover that they weren't facing frightened civilians. They were facing a ranger who had never truly left the battlefield behind. Cole woke before his alarm, the first gray light of dawn barely visible through his bedroom window. Something had disturbed his sleep, not a sound, but rather the absence of familiar night sounds. The coyotes that typically howled in the distance had gone silent. In Afghanistan, such sudden silences often preceded an ambush. He moved to the window with practiced stealth, keeping to the side as he peered out. Nothing visible, but his instincts hummed with warning. After pulling on jeans and a flannel shirt, Cole stepped onto his porch, coffee mug in hand, a civilian pose that disguised his heightened alertness. The distant rumble of vehicles drew his attention to the south road. A convoy of 3 black SUVs with tinted windows moved slowly toward town, dust billowing behind them. No markings, no logos, just the distinctive silhouette of Escalades with aftermarket modifications. Cole recognized the setup immediately. Reinforced suspensions for the extra weight of armor plating, custom wheels designed for high-speed stability, and the slight bulge in the rear indicating hidden compartments. These weren't the vehicles of construction workers. These belonged to men who needed to project power and move valuable cargo. By the time Cole reached his hardware store, Main Street was buzzing with unusual activity. Several new faces lingered outside the cafe, their eyes tracking every vehicle that passed. 2 men sat in a parked truck across from the sheriff's office, attempting casual conversation while maintaining clear sight lines to the building's entrance. Cole unlocked his store and went through his opening routine, all while noting the positions of the strangers. Years of combat had taught him to create mental maps of potentially hostile elements, current locations, probable intentions, tactical vulnerabilities. The bell above his door jingled as Luis Cortez entered. The young ranch hand's face was drawn with tension. "Mr. Emerson," he said in a hushed voice, approaching the counter. "I need to talk to you about something." Cole nodded toward the back room. Once they were away from the windows, Luis's formal demeanor dissolved into open fear. "They came to my uncle's ranch yesterday. 4 men in expensive suits with guns under their jackets. They said they were business associates looking to expand operations in the area." Luis's hands trembled slightly. "They weren't asking, Mr. Emerson. They were telling. Said they'd be using the south section of his property and would compensate him for his cooperation." "Your uncle agreed?" Cole asked, his voice neutral. What choice did he have? They knew about his daughter in college, knew which dorm she lives in. Luis swallowed hard. "But that's not why I came. While they were talking, I was fixing a fence line nearby. I saw them inspecting the old airstrip, the one my uncle's father used for crop dusting back in the day. They were measuring it, checking the ground. One of them kept looking at his phone, showing the others something." Cole processed this information with a cold efficiency that had once made him an exceptional mission planner. An abandoned airstrip would be valuable to the cartel, a place to land small planes away from border patrol surveillance. "Were any of them military?" Cole asked. "The way they moved, talked." Luis thought for a moment. "One, maybe. The others deferred to him on certain questions. He walked differently, checked corners, kept his back to walls." After Luis left, Cole placed a call to Sheriff Wilson. "Got some information about our new visitors," Cole said when Wilson answered. "Might want to come by when you have a moment." "Can't right now," Wilson replied, tension evident in his voice. "Got a situation at the bank. Some of our new residents are having a loud disagreement with the manager about large cash deposits. I'm headed there now. Need backup?" Cole asked, the question loaded with meaning. A pause. "Not yet. But stay near your radio." Cole spent the morning helping customers while keeping one eye on the street. The unfamiliar vehicles made regular patrols through town, not hiding their presence, but making it known. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Establish visibility first, then gradually escalate pressure. Around noon, the bell above the door rang again. Cole looked up to see 3 men entering, none of them locals. The leader wore an expensive watch and a light blazer that didn't quite conceal the handgun at his waist. His 2 companions remained near the door, their stance and positioning immediately identifiable to Cole as security personnel. "Good afternoon," the man said with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm looking for the owner." "You found him," Cole replied, continuing to stock a shelf as if uninterested. "Excellent. My name is Raul Vega. I represent an investment group looking to establish business relationships in the area." He gestured around the store. "You have a nice operation here." "Been in business long." 20 years, Cole lied, knowing his grandfather had opened the store 40 years earlier. He was testing whether these men had actually done their research. Vega nodded as if this matched his information, confirming Cole's suspicion that the man knew nothing about Clearwater beyond its strategic value. We're interested in establishing a supply chain partnership with local businesses. Our organization can offer preferred pricing on a variety of goods, construction materials, electronics, specialty items. All we ask is cooperation with occasional special shipments. Cole recognized the approach immediately. Start with a seemingly legitimate business proposal, then gradually introduce illegal activities, first storage, then distribution, eventually using the business as a front for money laundering. Not interested, Cole said flatly, turning back to his inventory. Vega's friendly demeanor cooled several degrees. I don't think you understand the opportunity here, Mr. Emerson. We're offering protection as well as partnership. Times are changing in this region. Smart businessmen adapt. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable. Cole faced the man directly now, his posture shifting subtly. To an untrained observer, nothing would seem different. To someone with combat experience, like the security man by the door whose hand had drifted toward his concealed weapon, the change would be obvious. Cole had transitioned from shopkeeper to predator in an instant. I appreciate the offer, Cole said evenly, but I run a simple business. No partners, no complications. That's how I like it. Vega studied him for a long moment, reassessing. You were military. It wasn't a question. Once upon a time, Cole acknowledged. Afghanistan? Iraq? Both. Something shifted in Vega's expression, a recalculation. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the counter. The offer remains open, Mr. Emerson. Think about it. Change can happen with you or without you, but it will happen. After they left, Cole examined the card. It listed Vega as a consultant for Southwest Regional Enterprises, with a phone number bearing a Juarez area code. He tucked the card away and picked up his cell phone. Doc, he said when Martinez answered. We need to meet. Tonight, usual place. By sundown, Cole had heard from several other business owners who'd received similar visits. The bank manager, the gas station owner, even Marla at the diner, all approached with the same blend of opportunity and veiled threat. At 8 o'clock, Cole pulled up behind the old water treatment plant at the edge of town. The facility had been decommissioned years ago but still provided an inconspicuous meeting place away from prying eyes. 3 other vehicles were already parked in the shadows, belonging to Doc Martinez, Sheriff Wilson, and Frank Delgado, a former Marine who ran the local auto repair shop. Inside, Martinez had set up a battery-powered lantern on a rusty desk. The men greeted each other with nods, their expressions grim. They hit every business on Main Street. Wilson began without preamble. Same approach everywhere. Partnership offers backed by implied threats. I called the state police, but they said without specific evidence of wrongdoing, there's nothing they can do. It's Los Hierros, said Delgado, referring to one of the newer cartels that had emerged after the old power structures fractured. My cousins in Border Patrol says they've been pushing north, establishing distribution networks in small towns. Less heat than the cities, easier to control the local population. Luis Cortez told me they're looking at his uncle's airstrip, Cole added. And I've noticed increased traffic on the old logging roads, vehicles moving at night, no lights. The men exchanged glances, each understanding the implications. Clearwater was being positioned as a hub close enough to the border for easy transport, small enough to fly under federal radar, isolated enough to control. What's their pattern? Cole asked, falling naturally into the role of tactical planner. Delgado pulled out a map of the region, spreading it on the desk. They start with business intimidation, then buy or force out key properties. Next comes manpower, bringing in their own people to establish control. Once the infrastructure is in place, they begin moving product and collecting taxes from locals. Timeline. Martinez asked. Based on what happened in Hartsville, we've got maybe 2 weeks before they start making examples of anyone who refuses to cooperate. Wilson ran a hand over his face. I've got 2 deputies in a jail with 4 cells. We're not equipped for this. Cole studied the map, his mind cycling through tactical scenarios. We need more information, their numbers, weapon capabilities, communication channels. Without intel, we're blind. The meeting continued late into the night, the four men establishing a preliminary response plan. Cole would coordinate surveillance. Wilson would document all interactions for potential legal action. Martinez would prepare medical supplies for worst-case scenarios. Delgado would reach out to his Border Patrol contacts for any additional intelligence. As they prepared to leave, Cole pulled Sheriff Wilson aside. "We need to warn the townspeople without causing panic," he said. "Some kind of community meeting. Make it about general safety, not specific threats." Wilson nodded. "Town hall, day after tomorrow. I'll make it happen." The next morning brought clear evidence of the cartel's next phase. A moving truck was parked outside the vacant building next to the bank, with workers unloading office furniture. A new sign was being installed: Southwest Regional Enterprises. They weren't hiding anymore. They were establishing a visible presence, a base of operations in the heart of town. Cole spent the day continuing his normal routine while engaging in constant passive surveillance. He noted license plates, faces, weapons profiles. By closing time, he had identified at least 12 cartel operatives moving freely through Clearwater, with probably twice that number supporting operations from outside town limits. As he locked up his store, Cole noticed a black Escalade parked across the street. The driver's window lowered slightly as he walked to his truck, just enough for him to glimpse the barrel of a rifle pointed in his direction. The vehicle didn't follow as he drove away. It didn't need to. The message had been delivered. "We're watching you." At home, Cole received 3 separate radio transmissions from his network of veterans. Similar cartel activities were being reported in towns across the region, a coordinated expansion effort unusual in its scale and organization. He was cleaning his AR-15 when headlights swept across his living room window. A vehicle was coming up his long driveway, not attempting stealth this time. Cole moved silently to his bedroom, returning with his M1911 pistol holstered at his hip. Whoever was coming, they would find him prepared. The knock was firm and measured. Through the peephole, Cole recognized Frank Delgado's broad shoulders. "Got company," Frank said grimly as Cole opened the door. "Someone followed me out of town, then broke off toward the highway. Thought you should know they're tracking our movements." Cole invited him in, scanning the darkness behind him before closing the door. "There's more," Delgado continued, declining Cole's offer of coffee. "My cousin says Border Patrol intercepted a cartel communication. Los Hierros is moving something big through this corridor next week, something valuable enough that they're clearing the path completely. That's why they're pushing so hard to establish control quickly." "Drugs?" Delgado shook his head. "They think it's people. High-value targets, maybe rival cartel leaders being moved north, maybe political figures. Whatever it is, they're creating a secure route and Clearwater's sitting right in the middle of it." After Delgado left, Cole walked the perimeter of his property, checking the motion sensors he'd installed years ago, not out of paranoia, but from the hard-learned lesson that peace was always temporary. He found nothing amiss, but the night felt charged with threat, the desert silence no longer comforting but watchful. The next day, tension in town was palpable. The cartel men moved with increased confidence, openly carrying weapons now. 2 black SUVs were parked permanently outside their new office, with armed guards positioned at the entrance. Cole received a visitor just before lunch, Tyler James, the boy whose father had died in Afghanistan. "Mom sent me," Tyler said, his young face serious beyond his years. "2 men came to our house this morning, asking about the property. Said they were interested in buying it. When Mom said it wasn't for sale, they started asking about me, my school, my friends." His voice wavered slightly. "They scared her, Mr. Emerson." Cold anger settled in Cole's chest. Targeting a widow and her son crossed a line that awakened something dangerous in him, the part of himself he'd tried to leave behind when he returned to civilian life. "You did right coming here," Cole told him. "Is your mom still at home?" Tyler nodded. "I want you both to pack some things. You'll stay with your aunt in Phoenix for a while. But school will still be here when this is over," Cole said firmly. "I'm going to drive by in an hour. Have your mom ready." After Tyler left, Cole called Wilson, Martinez, and Delgado, informing them of this escalation. The cartel was now directly threatening families. The situation was accelerating faster than they'd anticipated. By mid-afternoon, Cole had ensured that Tyler and his mother were safely on their way to Phoenix. As he drove back into town, he noticed increased cartel activity, more vehicles, more visible weapons, more checkpoints being established on side streets. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 that evening. As Cole approached the municipal building, he counted at least 20 cartel vehicles parked nearby. They were planning to make their presence known at the meeting, perhaps even to announce their takeover formally. Inside, Sheriff Wilson was consulting with Mayor Hendricks, a nervous man ill-equipped for the crisis unfolding in his town. Cole joined them, keeping his voice low. "They're going to be here in force," he warned. "This could get tense." Wilson nodded grimly. "I've got my deputies positioned at the exits. Not that it would make much difference if things go sideways." The meeting room filled quickly with concerned citizens. Cole noted Doc Martinez and Frank Delgado taking positions near opposite walls, providing coverage of the entire room. Other veterans from the area had also arrived, stationing themselves strategically, none of them openly armed, but all ready to respond if necessary. At precisely 7, Mayor Hendricks called the meeting to order. He had barely introduced the topic of community safety concerns when the main doors opened. Raul Vega entered, flanked by 8 men whose jackets couldn't conceal their tactical gear. The room fell silent as they moved to the center aisle. "Please continue," Vega said with a smile that resembled a predator's. "I believe this meeting concerns us all." Sheriff Wilson stepped forward, hand deliberately away from his sidearm. "This is a town meeting for Clearwater residents, sir." "Ah, but we are the newest residents of your charming community," Vega replied smoothly. "In fact, Southwest Regional Enterprises has just acquired several properties and business interests here. We're heavily invested in Clearwater's future." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Cole watched the positioning of Vega's men, noting their formation and the way they continuously scanned the crowd. These weren't common criminals. They moved with the discipline of paramilitary forces. Mayor Hendricks, visibly sweating, attempted to regain control of the meeting. Perhaps Mr. Vega could introduce himself properly to the community and explain the nature of his business interests. It was a fumbling attempt at diplomacy, but it gave Vega the floor, exactly what he wanted. "Thank you, Mayor." Vega moved to the front of the room with casual confidence. "My organization specializes in logistics and distribution. We've identified Clearwater as an ideal location for expansion. Our presence will bring jobs, investment, and security to your community." He paused, surveying the room before continuing, his voice hardening slightly. "Change can be difficult, I understand. But it is inevitable. Those who embrace this change will prosper. Those who resist," he shrugged eloquently, "they often reconsider, eventually." The threat hung in the air. Cole caught Wilson's eye across the room, a silent communication passing between them. This was no longer about intimidation. It was an open declaration of intent. The cartel was claiming Clearwater as territory. An elderly man stood up from the front row, his voice quavering with age but firm with conviction. "My family has farmed outside this town for 4 generations. We've weathered dust storms, droughts, and hard times. We don't scare easy, mister." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Vega's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Courage is admirable," he said, "but sometimes misplaced. Ask the proud people of Hartsville how their resistance worked out for them." At the mention of the neighboring town where businesses had been burned and the sheriff hospitalized, a chill settled over the room. Vega had just openly admitted to criminal actions while threatening similar consequences here. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward again. "That sounds remarkably like a threat, Mr. Vega. I should remind you that we're still under the rule of law here." Vega laughed lightly. "Of course, Sheriff. I was merely making a historical observation." He turned back to the crowd. "My associates and I will leave you to your meeting now. We look forward to becoming valued members of this community, one way or another." As the cartel contingent filed out, Cole counted 3 additional men who had been sitting separately among the townspeople, spotters positioned to identify the most vocal opponents. The meeting continued for another hour, with Sheriff Wilson outlining increased patrols and safety measures while carefully avoiding direct mention of the cartel threat. The subtext was clear to everyone. Clearwater was under siege. Afterward, Cole joined Wilson, Martinez, Delgado, and several other veterans in the small room behind the sheriff's office. The mood was grim. "They're moving faster than we expected," Wilson said. "The way Vega talked, they've already purchased properties, probably using front companies or intimidation. We've got maybe days, not weeks," Delgado added. "Once they establish full operational control, pushing them out becomes nearly impossible without federal intervention." Cole had remained silent, his mind working through scenarios with the calculated precision that had once made him an exceptional combat leader. "We need to assume they're monitoring all of us now," he finally said. "Phone calls, movements, meetings. They'll identify potential resistance and target it specifically." He looked around the room at the weathered faces of men who had served their country and now faced an enemy on home soil. This isn't a law enforcement situation anymore. They have too many resources, too much firepower. "What are you suggesting?" Martinez asked quietly. Cole's expression was impassive, but his eyes had taken on the focused intensity his ranger unit had called his mission face. "We start preparing for the real fight," he said. "Because it's coming whether we're ready or not." Dawn broke over Clearwater with an ominous silence. Cole stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the eastern sky turn from purple to crimson. The town had changed overnight, not physically, but in the invisible boundaries that now defined movement and safety. Cartel vehicles patrolled the streets with increasing frequency. Men with radios and concealed weapons positioned themselves at key intersections. Clearwater was being locked down. His radio crackled with Frank Delgado's voice, tense and urgent. "They've taken the gas station." Jorge refused their protection offer. "They've got men inside now, controlling who gets fuel." Cole acknowledged the transmission, his jaw tightening. Control of fuel meant control of movement, a fundamental step in isolating the town. The cartel was following the insurgency playbook with textbook precision. As he drove toward town, Cole noted 2 black SUVs parked on the highway overpass, spotters monitoring all traffic in and out of Clearwater. He maintained a casual pace, his expression neutral despite the tactical assessment running through his mind. 8 men visible, likely more nearby. Heavy weapons in the vehicles, based on their stance and positioning. The gas station confirmed Delgado's report. 3 armed men stood near the pumps while a 4th operated the register inside. Jorge Ramirez, the owner, was nowhere to be seen. Cole drove past without stopping, cataloging details, weapon types, communication equipment, tactical positions. Main Street presented similar scenes of occupation. Southwest Regional Enterprises had expanded overnight, with armed personnel now visible outside multiple businesses. The cartel wasn't bothering with subtlety anymore. They were establishing visible dominance. Cole parked outside his hardware store, noting the fresh tire tracks that had left mud on his previously clean entrance. Someone had visited during the night. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed at first glance, but as trained, I caught the subtle signs of intrusion. Items on shelves shifted slightly, desk drawers closed imperfectly. They had searched his business, looking for weapons perhaps, or evidence of resistance planning. He had barely unlocked the front door when a woman's scream cut through the morning air. Across the street, 2 cartel men were dragging a teenage girl toward a waiting vehicle while her mother fought desperately to stop them. The girl, Cole recognized her as Emma Peterson, 17 and bound for college next year, was fighting with everything she had, but the men handled her with practiced efficiency. Without conscious thought, Cole moved. Years of combat training took over, his body transitioning from shopkeeper to operator in seconds. He crossed the street at an angle, approaching from the men's blind side, while they focused on controlling the struggling girl. "Let her go." His voice cut through the chaos, quiet but carrying an authority that made both men turn. The taller one sneered, hand moving toward his concealed weapon. "This isn't your business, old man. The girl's father owes our organization. She'll work off his debt." Cole's mind flashed back to villages in Afghanistan, where he'd seen the same predatory trafficking disguised as debt collection. The familiar rage rose in him, cold, focused, and deadly. "Last chance," Cole said, voice still calm despite the lethal intent now radiating from him. "Let her go and drive away." The second man had fully drawn his weapon now, pointing it casually in Cole's direction. "You got a death wish, gringo?" "Walk away," while he never finished the sentence. Cole moved with an explosive speed that belied his age, closing the distance before either man could react. His right hand captured the gunman's wrist, forcing the weapon upward while his left delivered a precision strike to the man's throat. As the first man crumpled, Cole seamlessly transitioned to the second attacker, who had released Emma to draw his own weapon. Cole's boot connected with the man's knee, collapsing it at an unnatural angle. As the man screamed, Cole disarmed him with a fluid motion and used the weapon to strike him unconscious. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. Emma's mother pulled her daughter away while Cole quickly retrieved both weapons, ejecting magazines and clearing chambers. Other townspeople had witnessed the confrontation, their expressions a mixture of shock and vindication. "Get inside," Cole told them all, his voice commanding but controlled. "Lock your doors." As the street cleared, Cole saw Sheriff Wilson's patrol car approaching rapidly. The Cartel SUV that had been waiting for the girl sped away, its driver clearly deciding that immediate retreat was wiser than confrontation. Wilson stepped out, hand on his sidearm as he surveyed the 2 downed Cartel members. "Jesus, Cole. What happened?" "They were taking Emma Peterson. Trafficking." Cole's voice was flat, emotionless, the same tone he'd used for mission debriefs after combat operations. The sheriff ran a hand over his face. "This is going to bring hell down on us. You know that, right?" Cole nodded once, already calculating next steps. It was coming anyway. "Get these 2 to your jail if you can. They'll be valuable for intelligence." "And you?" Wilson asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll be getting ready." Cole turned and walked back to his store, aware that multiple eyes, both townspeople and Cartel, were watching his every move. Inside, he went directly to his back office and retrieved the go bag he kept prepared, a habit from his military days that had never faded. The bag contained essential supplies, a burner phone, cash, and a key to a storage unit outside town where he maintained additional equipment. Opening his desk drawer, he removed a false bottom to reveal a satellite phone that couldn't be monitored by conventional means. He made one call. "It's starting. Clearwater needs your help." The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar. "How many?" "At least 30 so far. More coming. We'll be there by nightfall." Cole ended the call and gathered what he needed from the store: cordage, tools, first aid supplies. To casual observers, he appeared to be collecting ordinary materials. To someone with tactical training, he was assembling components for improvised devices and defensive preparations. As Cole finished loading his truck, Raul Vega's Escalade pulled up alongside, the window lowering to reveal the Cartel leader's cold smile. "Mr. Emerson, I understand there was an unfortunate incident this morning." Cole turned slowly to face him, nothing in his expression revealing the calculations running through his mind. Range, angles, threats, opportunities, the combat algorithm never truly shut down once you'd lived with it long enough. "Your men were taking a teenage girl," Cole replied evenly. "That doesn't happen here." Vega's smile didn't waver. "A misunderstanding, I'm sure. But I'm afraid actions have consequences. 2 of my men are seriously injured. One may not recover. Sounds like you should hire better men." Cole's gaze was steady, unintimidated. For a moment, Vega's mask slipped, showing the predator beneath. "You've made a serious mistake, Ranger. We know who you are, what you were. Your military record is impressive, but you're just one man, and we are many." The use of his former title confirmed Cole's suspicion that the Cartel had run a background check on potential opposition. They knew his training, his capabilities. What they didn't know was that such information cut both ways. It would make them more cautious, less likely to attack directly. One is enough, if it's the right one, Cole responded, the words carrying the weight of lessons learned in combat. Vegas studied him a moment longer. Consider this your only warning, Mr. Emerson. Interfere again, and we won't come for just you. We'll take everything and everyone you care about. He gestured toward the town. All these people you're trying to protect, their suffering will be on your hands. As the Escalade pulled away, Cole watched it until it turned the corner. The threat was explicit now, the battle lines drawn. What had been a gradual infiltration had just accelerated into open conflict. He had forced the cartel's hand, pushing them into showing their true nature earlier than they'd planned. Cole drove directly to Doc Martinez's clinic, knowing it would serve as their primary medical facility when violence escalated. The doctor was already preparing, organizing supplies, and converting his back rooms into a makeshift emergency ward. How bad? Martinez asked as Cole entered. They'll hit us tonight or tomorrow. Full force. They need to make an example now. Martinez nodded grimly, continuing to sort medical supplies. That girl they tried to take, her father came to me last week. Said men had approached him about using his barn for storage. When he refused, they threatened his daughter. The town needs to know what's coming, Cole said. No more pretending this is just a business dispute. The school, Martinez replied immediately. We need to get the children out first. Cole agreed. The cartel would use any leverage available, including hostages, if the situation deteriorated. Protecting civilians, particularly children, had to be the priority. They were discussing evacuation routes when Sheriff Wilson entered, his expression grave. They've blocked the north and south roads out of town. Checkpoints with armed men. They're saying it's for community safety, but no one's getting through without their approval. The three men exchanged glances, recognizing the tactical significance. The cartel was isolating Clearwater, cutting off escape routes before launching their main assault. What about the two you arrested? Cole asked. Wilson's face darkened. 4 cartel lawyers showed up 20 minutes ago with release orders signed by Judge Harmon in the county seat. Had to let them go. The corruption had spread beyond Clearwater then, reaching into the county legal system. The situation was deteriorating faster than anticipated. Cole laid out his immediate plan: establish a defensive perimeter around the school, create evacuation routes using the old ranch trails to bypass the main roads, and prepare the town center for the coming confrontation. As Cole left the clinic, the sound of vehicles drew his attention to the eastern edge of town. A convoy of 6 black SUVs and 2 cargo trucks was arriving, cartel reinforcements, just as he'd predicted. The escalation was underway. He drove to the school first, meeting with Principal Sandoval to initiate emergency protocols without causing panic. Parents would be contacted to collect their children using a prearranged signal that indicated a genuine emergency rather than a routine early dismissal. From there, Cole headed to his storage unit 3 miles outside town. Inside was the equipment he'd hoped never to use again: tactical gear, communication devices, and weapons he'd legally acquired after leaving service. As he loaded the supplies into his truck, his mind flashed back to similar preparations before combat missions. Kandahar Province, 2011. Cole's Ranger unit preparing for a night raid on a Taliban compound. The same methodical checking of equipment, the same focused calm before violence. Remember, clean shots only, he'd told his team as they geared up. We're after the leadership, not a body count. No civilians in the crossfire. His second-in-command, Tyler's father, had nodded in agreement. Rules of engagement clear, Captain. We go in quiet, identify targets, extract or eliminate as ordered. 6 hours later, half the team was dead, including Tyler's father, caught in an ambush that intelligence had failed to predict. Cole had carried his wounded friend 3 miles to extraction, listening to him talk about his son back home, until he fell silent just before the helicopters arrived. The memory sharpened Cole's resolve. This wasn't a foreign battlefield with unclear objectives. This was home, and the mission parameters were absolute. Protect the town, minimize civilian casualties, eliminate the cartel threat. By mid-afternoon, the children had been evacuated from the school. Most families had taken the warning seriously, packing essentials and leaving town using the backtrails Cole had identified. Those who couldn't leave, the elderly, those caring for them, and those who refused to abandon their homes, were consolidated in defensible locations. Cole drove to Frank Delgado's auto shop, which had become their de facto headquarters. Inside, he found not only Delgado, Martinez, and Wilson, but also 6 other veterans who had answered his call, men from neighboring communities who understood what was at stake. Among them was Mike Tanner, a former Force Recon Marine who had served with Delgado, and Sam Williams, who had been in Army Special Forces. These weren't weekend warriors playing soldier. They were experienced combat veterans who had seen this pattern before in other countries. They've established checkpoints here, and here, Wilson said, pointing to locations on a map spread across Delgado's workbench. Main force is concentrated around their headquarters building, with roving patrols throughout town. I count at least 40 armed men, possibly more in reserve. What about the sheriff's department? Asked Williams. Wilson's expression was grim. My 2 deputies resigned this morning. Said they couldn't put their families at risk. Can't blame them. They're not trained for this. Cole studied the map, identifying tactical vulnerabilities and defensive positions. Our priority is containing the conflict to specific areas, away from any remaining civilians. We create choke points here and here, force them to commit to predictable approaches. He outlined his assessment of cartel capabilities, primarily small arms with possibly some heavier weapons, limited tactical training but high aggression, good communications but likely poor coordination under pressure. The men listened intently, adding their own observations and suggestions. What about the feds? Tanner asked. Border Patrol? DEA? Delgado shook his head. My cousin says they're spread thin with simultaneous operations across 3 states. By design, I'm guessing. Even if we get through, response time would be hours, not minutes. Then we're on our own, Cole concluded. We use what we have, who we have. The planning continued as daylight faded. Positions were assigned, communication protocols established, and contingencies developed for various scenarios. Each man understood his role and the overall strategy. Defensive positions first, controlled escalation if necessary, civilian protection paramount. As the veterans prepared to move out, Cole noticed Sheriff Wilson standing apart, his expression troubled. Having second thoughts? Cole asked quietly. Wilson exhaled slowly. I took an oath to uphold the law. What we're planning, it crosses a line. Sometimes the line moves, Cole replied. These aren't ordinary criminals, and this isn't an ordinary situation. They've already shown what they'll do if we don't stop them. The sheriff nodded reluctantly. I know. Just needed to hear it said out loud. He checked his weapon with practiced hands. Let's do this. Night had fallen completely when the men moved into position around town. Cole, Delgado, and Tanner took the north sector, covering the approach to the school and community center where many remaining civilians had gathered for safety. Williams and 2 others covered the east, while Wilson and the rest secured the south and west. Cole positioned himself on the roof of the feed store, which offered clear sight lines to the cartel's headquarters and main checkpoint. Through his night vision equipment, he could see the increased activity around the cartel building, men moving with purpose, vehicles being positioned strategically. They were preparing for something. At precisely 10 p.m., the power went out across Clearwater. Cole had anticipated this tactic. Control of infrastructure was a standard step in establishing dominance. He switched to thermal imaging, tracking the movement of cartel forces as they deployed into the darkened town. His radio crackled softly. 6-man team moving toward the clinic. Came Williams' voice. Armed and moving with intent. Hold position, Cole responded. Observe only unless civilians are threatened. Another transmission. Vehicles approaching from the south road. For SUVs, heavy load based on suspension. The cartel was bringing in their main force now, preparing for a dawn operation most likely. It was a predictable move: establish security during darkness, then display overwhelming force at first light to break any remaining resistance. Cole's satellite phone vibrated. The caller ID showed nothing, but he knew who it would be. "We're in position," said the voice on the other end. 2 miles out, southeastern approach. 16 operators, full kit. Awaiting your signal. Hold for now, Cole replied. They're still deploying. We need to let them commit fully before we engage. He ended the call, returning his attention to the cartel movements. Through his scope, he could see Raul Vega emerge from the headquarters building, surrounded by security as he issued directions to his lieutenants. Cole's finger rested lightly outside the trigger guard of his rifle, not targeting, just observing, though the opportunity presented itself clearly. Taking out Vega now would create confusion, but also immediate violence that might threaten civilians. Cole held his position, patient as only a veteran of long surveillance operations could be. The radio came to life again. Movement at the Peterson residence. 3 men, armed. It was Delgado's voice, tense but controlled. Cole's jaw tightened. Emma Peterson and her mother should have evacuated with the others, if they had remained. I'm moving to intercept, Delgado continued. Rules of engagement? Civilian protection authorized. Cole responded immediately. Minimum force to secure their safety. He shifted his position slightly, bringing his scope to bear on that sector of town. Through the thermal imaging, he could make out heat signatures. 3 men approaching the Peterson home, where 2 smaller signatures indicated the woman and her daughter inside. Before Delgado could reach the house, the men had forced entry. Cole watched, every muscle tense, as Delgado approached the rear of the property. Minutes passed, agonizing minutes where imagination filled the gaps in information. Then Delgado's voice, breathless but clear, civilians secured. 3 tangos down. Moving to extraction point Alpha. Cole acknowledged, relief mixing with the knowledge that the conflict had now begun in earnest. First blood had been drawn. There would be no de-escalation from this point forward. As if in confirmation, his radio exploded with reports from all sectors. The cartel had registered the engagement at the Peterson house and was mobilizing in response, vehicles moving, men deploying with weapons now openly displayed. All units maintain defensive positions, Cole ordered. Do not engage unless directly threatened or to protect civilians. Let them come to us. Through his scope, he watched Vega shouting at his lieutenants, clearly furious at this unexpected resistance. Good. Anger led to mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. The next hour passed in tense observation as cartel forces conducted sweeps through town, searching for the source of resistance. Cole's veterans maintained discipline, staying hidden, observing, reporting movements, but not engaging. Just after midnight, the pattern changed. Cartel vehicles began converging on the community center where many of the town's elderly and those unable to evacuate had taken shelter. Even from a distance, Cole could see the aggressive stance of the men deploying around the building. They're going for hostages, he said into the radio. All units converge on the community center. Priority is civilian protection. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the cartel committing to a single location, focusing their attention on what they thought was a soft target. As his team moved into position, Cole made the call he'd been holding in reserve. Green light, he said into the satellite phone. Community center, southern approach. Cartel forces and strength, civilians inside. Roger that. ETA 3 minutes. Cole descended from his position and moved swiftly through back alleys toward the community center, using the darkness and his intimate knowledge of the town to remain undetected. As he approached, he could see cartel men establishing a perimeter, their attention focused on the building's entrances. They never thought to watch their own rear. The first indication that something had changed was the sudden absence of radio chatter from the cartel's southern checkpoint. Then, moving like shadows, figures in tactical gear appeared at the edge of Cole's vision, his reinforcements arriving precisely on schedule. These weren't local veterans with hunting rifles. These were active-duty operators from a special operations unit based near the border, men Cole had served with. Men who understood that some threats required immediate action rather than bureaucratic response. Officially, they weren't here. Unofficially, they had responded to a veteran's call for help against a clear and present danger to American citizens. Cole made contact with their leader, a captain named Rodriguez whom he'd trained years earlier. No words were wasted, just hand signals indicating positions, targets, and timing. The operation unfolded with precision. For Cartel sentries were neutralized simultaneously with suppressed weapons. The main force, still focused on the community center, remained unaware that their perimeter had been compromised. Cole gave the signal, and the combined force of veterans and operators moved in from multiple directions. The Cartel men, expecting to be the predators, suddenly found themselves caught in a professional military ambush. The resulting firefight was brief but intense. The Cartel had numbers and firepower, but they lacked the discipline and coordination of trained military units. Within minutes, their attack on the community center had been repelled, with multiple casualties and the rest retreating toward their headquarters. Cole led a team to secure the civilians inside, while Rodriguez's men established defensive positions around the building. Doc Martinez, who had been inside protecting the elderly residents, quickly organized care for those affected by the stress and chaos. "They'll regroup and hit us harder," Rodriguez said as he joined Cole. "That was just the initial force. Based on the communications we intercepted, they've got at least twice that number in reserve." Cole nodded, already planning the next phase. "We've got maybe 2 hours before they come back. We need to get these people out and establish a fallback position." The evacuation began immediately, with the elderly and infirm loaded into vehicles that would take them out along the secured southern escape route. As the last civilians were moved to safety, Cole gathered his combined force for the decisive operation. "The Cartel's command structure is concentrated here," he said, pointing to their headquarters on the map. "They've committed most of their forces to this area, expecting us to remain defensive. Instead, we're going to take the fight to them, hit their command center directly while they're still reorganizing." The plan was direct but tactically sound. A three-pronged approach with Cole's team creating a diversion on the western flank, while Rodriguez's operators hit the main building from the north and east. Sheriff Wilson and Delgado would maintain a blocking position to prevent reinforcements from reaching the fight. As they moved out, Cole felt the familiar combat focus descending, a state of heightened awareness combined with emotional detachment that had carried him through dozens of operations. This wasn't about anger or vengeance. It was about protecting his home with the skills his country had taught him to use. The operation began with precisely coordinated timing. Cole's team engaged Cartel positions with disciplined fire, creating the impression of a frontal assault. As expected, the Cartel responded by concentrating forces to repel the perceived main threat. That was when Rodriguez's operators struck from the shadows, breaching the headquarters building with the swift efficiency of men who had conducted hundreds of such operations. The Cartel's command structure, including Vega, was captured in the first 2 minutes of the assault. Cole's team pushed forward, linking up with the operators to secure the perimeter as the remaining Cartel forces, now leaderless and surrounded, began to scatter or surrender. By dawn, the battle for Clearwater was effectively over. The Cartel's leadership had been neutralized, their forces dispersed or captured. Rodriguez's team disappeared as professionally as they had arrived, leaving no evidence of their presence beyond the results of their work. Sheriff Wilson, operating once again within his legal authority, began processing prisoners and securing weapons. State police and federal agencies, finally responsive now that the immediate threat had been resolved, were en route to take control of the situation. Cole stood on Main Street as the sun rose, watching townspeople emerge cautiously from their homes. The hardware store's windows were shattered, and several buildings showed damage from the fighting. But the town itself, the community, had survived. Doc Martinez approached, exhaustion evident in his face. We lost 2 of ours. 3 more wounded, but they'll recover. God knows how many cartel casualties. Cole nodded, accepting the information without visible reaction, though each loss weighed heavily. The Peterson girl? Safe. Delgado got them out clean. Martinez studied his friend's impassive expression. This isn't on you, Cole. You didn't bring this war here. You just finished it. But Cole knew different. He had forced the confrontation by intervening when they took Emma Peterson. He had escalated by calling in his old unit. The responsibility was his, as was the necessity of those actions. As residents began the process of reclaiming their town, a familiar truck pulled up beside Cole. Frank Delgado leaned out the window, his expression somber. Border Patrol just found something at the Cortez Ranch. You need to see this. 20 minutes later, Cole stood in the old barn beside Luis Cortez's uncle's airstrip. Before him were open crates containing what appeared to be military-grade weapons, hundreds of them, along with communications equipment and enough ammunition to supply a small army. This wasn't just about establishing a drug route, said the Border Patrol agent in charge. Based on what we're seeing, they were setting up a forward operating base. These weapons were headed north, not south. They're supplying cells already embedded in major cities. Cole absorbed this information silently. What had appeared to be a local threat had been part of something much larger, a coordinated operation to establish cartel military capacity deep inside the United States. We would have missed it completely if you hadn't disrupted their timeline, the agent continued. By the time we understood what was happening, these weapons would have been distributed to God knows where. As Cole drove back toward town, he reflected on the thin margins that separated safety from catastrophe, peace from violence. The quiet town he'd chosen for retirement had become a battleground, yet because of that same town, because it contained men like him, who had seen war before and recognized its approach, a greater threat had been averted. Clearwater would rebuild. The damaged buildings would be repaired, the broken windows replaced. The physical scars would fade quickly. The other kind, the ones carried by those who had fought, those who had witnessed the violence, those who had discovered that safety was always conditional, those would take longer to heal. But they had protected their home. In the end, that was what mattered. 3 hours after dawn, the convoy arrived. 6 armored SUVs and 4 troop transports rolled into Clearwater with the distinctive markings of the Los Hierros cartel, stylized iron crosses emblazoned on their doors. Cole watched from the roof of the hardware store as the vehicles formed a perimeter around the town square. This wasn't a reconnaissance force or an advance team. This was the main element, at least 60 heavily armed men deploying with military precision. The cartel had escalated beyond anything Cole had anticipated. These weren't street thugs with pistols. These were paramilitary operators with tactical gear, communication systems, and coordinated movement patterns. Their weapons were military-grade, primarily M4 variants with optical sights, along with what appeared to be bell-fed machine guns mounted on several vehicles. Cole keyed his radio. All positions, maintain discipline. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. The response came immediately from multiple channels, his veterans confirming their positions and status. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they still held the defenders' advantage of superior position and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Through his binoculars, Cole observed the cartel forces establishing defensive positions around the square. Their leader emerged from the center vehicle, not Vega, but someone new. Taller, leaner, with the unmistakable bearing of professional military training. The man surveyed the surroundings with calculating eyes, then issued orders that sent his men fanning out through adjacent streets. Cole switched to his satellite phone. Situation has escalated. Primary force has arrived with heavy weapons and what appears to be ex-military leadership. Approximately 60 combatants. Request immediate support. The response was immediate but not what he'd hoped for. Negative on immediate support. Assets committed to multiple situations across the border region. Earliest available QRF is 4 hours out. 4 hours. Cole absorbed this information without emotion, already adjusting his tactical planning. They would need to hold their positions and protect the remaining civilians without direct confrontation until reinforcements arrived. The radio crackled again. "Cole, they've got a hostage." It was Wilson's voice, tense but controlled. "Jorge from the gas station. They're dragging him into the square." Cole shifted his position, bringing his scope to bear on the scene. The gas station owner was indeed being forced into the center of the square, his face bloodied from what appeared to be a severe beating. The cartel's new leader stood beside him, holding what looked like a loudspeaker. "People of Clearwater." The man's voice boomed across the town, his accent revealing Colombian rather than Mexican origins. "My name is Colonel Vargas. You have something that belongs to my organization, Raul Vega and his men. Return them immediately, and your town will be spared further violence." "Colonel." The title confirmed Cole's suspicion that they were dealing with someone with formal military training, likely one of the many former Special Forces operators who had been recruited by cartels for their expertise. Vargas continued, gesturing to the beaten gas station owner. "You have 1 hour to comply. After that, we will execute this man and continue with others until our demands are met. Any resistance will be crushed completely." As if to emphasize his point, the cartel forces fired a coordinated volley into the air, a show of force meant to intimidate the town into submission. Cole's mind raced through options, calculating risks and potential outcomes with the cold efficiency of a combat veteran. A direct assault against superior numbers and firepower would result in unacceptable casualties. A defensive position might hold temporarily but would leave civilians vulnerable. Negotiation would only delay the inevitable while giving the cartel time to strengthen their position. "Sheriff, can you get a line of communication open with this Colonel Vargas?" Cole asked over the radio. "Probably," Wilson replied. "What's the play?" "Delay tactics. Keep him talking while we reposition and evacuate any remaining civilians through the tunnel system." The tunnels were Clearwater's secret advantage, a network of old mining passages that ran beneath parts of the town, originally used for bootlegging during Prohibition. Few people knew of their existence, and fewer still knew the complete layout. Cole had mapped them thoroughly during his first year back in town, recognizing their tactical value for exactly this kind of situation. As Wilson opened communications with Vargas, Cole coordinated with his team to begin moving civilians into the tunnel entrances hidden in various basements and storage rooms around town. The elderly who couldn't be evacuated earlier, the few families who had refused to leave, shop owners who had stayed to protect their businesses, all needed to be moved to safety before the inevitable assault began. Cole descended from his observation post and made his way through back alleys toward Doc Martinez's position at the clinic. The building had been converted into their fallback medical station, with supplies and equipment staged for rapid casualty response. "How many civilians still in town?" Cole asked as he entered through the rear door. Martinez looked up from organizing trauma kits. "Maybe 30, mostly concentrated in the eastern residential area. Delgado's team is moving them out now." Cole nodded, unfolding a map of the town on an examination table. "We need to adjust our defensive perimeter. Based on their deployment pattern, they'll push from the center outward, clearing buildings systematically." He marked positions for his veterans to fall back to, creating a layered defense that would channel the cartel forces into predictable movement corridors. With limited personnel, they couldn't defend everywhere, but they could make the enemy pay for every foot of ground they took. "What about Jorge?" Martinez asked quietly. "They'll kill him in," he checked his watch, 45 minutes. Cole's expression remained impassive, but his mind was calculating trajectories, distances, and timing. "I'll handle that. Get the medical evacuation ready. He'll need immediate attention." Without further explanation, Cole left the clinic and made his way to a position that offered a clear line of sight to the town square. Using back routes and maintenance passages between buildings, he moved undetected despite the increased cartel presence on the streets. From a second-floor window in an abandoned office building, Cole assembled his rifle, a precision bolt-action weapon he'd used as a designated marksman in his ranger unit. Through the scope, he could clearly see Jorge kneeling in the center of the square, hands bound behind his back. 2 guards stood nearby, while Colonel Vargas paced impatiently, checking his watch periodically. Cole established his shooting position, calculating for wind, distance, and elevation. The shot would be relatively straightforward at this range, under 300 meters with minimal crosswind, but timing would be critical. He needed to create a momentary distraction that would allow Jorge to move to cover without being immediately recaptured or shot. The radio at his hip crackled. In position came Frank Delgado's voice. "Eastern distraction ready on your mark." "Hold for my signal," Cole replied. "Wait for the shot." He sighted in, controlling his breathing as he had done hundreds of times in combat situations. The familiarity of the ritual, the measured breath, the slight pressure on the trigger, the perfect stillness, brought him back to dusty ridgelines in Afghanistan, where similar shots had meant the difference between life and death for his men. Through his scope, Cole could see Sheriff Wilson approaching the square under a white flag, ostensibly to negotiate. The sheriff's instructions were clear: keep Vargas talking, stay clear of Jorge, and be ready to move when the shot came. Wilson and Vargas began their exchange, the colonel's attention focused on the sheriff rather than his hostage. Cole waited, watching for the perfect moment when the guard's attention might waver. It came when Vargas turned to gesture toward his men, momentarily creating a gap between the guards and Jorge. Cole exhaled smoothly and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the square, striking not any person but the radio equipment mounted on the nearest cartel vehicle. Simultaneously, Delgado's team detonated their distraction, a series of small explosive charges placed on abandoned vehicles at the eastern edge of town. The multiple explosions and the destruction of their communications created the momentary confusion Cole had anticipated. Wilson reacted instantly, diving toward Jorge and pulling him behind the concrete base of the town's flagpole. Cole fired 3 more precisely placed shots, not to kill, but to disable the nearest cartel vehicle and create smoke and confusion. In the chaos, Wilson managed to cut Jorge's bonds and drag him toward a drainage culvert that led away from the square. The cartel forces recovered quickly, opening fire on Wilson's last seen position, but the sheriff and hostage were already moving through the drainage system toward Extraction Point Bravo, where Doc Martinez would be waiting to treat Jorge's injuries. Cole disassembled his rifle with practiced efficiency and moved from his position seconds before cartel men stormed the building. By the time they reached the second floor, he was already 2 blocks away, moving through the interconnected basement passages of Main Street businesses. The radio crackled with Wilson's voice. "Package secure, moving to medical." One small victory, but the main battle was just beginning. Cole could hear the cartel forces mobilizing, vehicles moving into position, commands being shouted, the distinctive sound of weapons being loaded and charged. The hour of negotiation had expired. Colonel Vargas was making good on his threat. Cole rendezvoused with Tanner and Williams in the basement of the old bank building, which they had established as their command post due to its central location and reinforced construction. The men gathered around a table where a detailed map of Clearwater was spread, showing their defensive positions and the known locations of cartel forces. "Civilians?" Cole asked immediately. "All accounted for," Tanner replied. "Either evacuated or secured in hardened locations with escape routes." Cole nodded, then outlined the situation. "They're mobilizing for a full sweep. Based on their deployment, they'll move in 3 elements. Main force pushing from the square eastward, secondary elements circling north and south to cut off retreat. Colonel Vargas is ex-military, possibly Colombian Special Forces based on his tactics and equipment. So they know what they're doing," Williams said grimly. "They do," Cole acknowledged. "Which means we don't fight them strength against strength. We use mobility, knowledge of terrain, and selective engagement." The plan he outlined was classic asymmetric warfare: avoid direct confrontation with superior forces, strike vulnerable targets of opportunity, create confusion and the impression of a larger defending force, then fade away before concentrated firepower could be brought to bear. Each of his veterans understood their role in this strategy. They had all faced similar situations in Iraq or Afghanistan, where direct assault against embedded insurgents had proven costly and ineffective. Now, ironically, they would employ the very tactics that had been used against them overseas. As the men moved out to their assigned positions, the first sounds of the cartel assault reached them: systematic weapon fire as buildings were cleared, vehicles moving in coordinated patterns, radio communications directing the sweep. Cole positioned himself at an intersection that offered multiple escape routes, watching as the first cartel element moved into view, 8 men in tactical formation, covering each other as they advanced. Their equipment and movement confirmed his assessment. These were trained operators, not common cartel gunmen. He waited until they passed his position, then triggered the first of many prepared surprises: a remotely detonated smoke grenade that filled the street behind them with dense white smoke, cutting off their visual contact with supporting elements. The men reacted with professional discipline, establishing a defensive perimeter rather than panicking. It was exactly what Cole had expected. As they focused on the smoke threat behind them, he engaged from an elevated position to their right flank, 2 precisely placed shots that wounded rather than killed, forcing the cartel to commit resources to casualty evacuation. Before they could identify his position, Cole was moving again, using the pre-planned route to relocate 2 blocks away. There, Williams executed a similar hit-and-fade attack on a different cartel element, creating the impression of defenders on multiple fronts. The pattern repeated across town, veterans appearing just long enough to inflict casualties and create confusion before disappearing into prepared escape routes. Each engagement was brief but effective, forcing the cartel to slow their advance and commit more resources to security rather than offensive operations. An hour into the battle, the cartel's methodical advance had bogged down into a confused urban security operation. Cole monitored their radio communications through captured equipment, noting the growing frustration in Colonel Vargas's voice as he demanded results from his subordinates. "They're adapting," Cole told his team over their secure channel, "consolidating into larger elements for better security. Phase 2 begins now." Phase 2 shifted from direct engagement to infrastructure disruption. The veterans began targeting the cartel's logistics, fuel trucks, ammunition storage, communications equipment. These attacks required greater risk but yielded higher impact, further degrading the cartel's operational effectiveness. Frank Delgado led a particularly daring operation against the cartel's command vehicles, infiltrating close enough to plant explosive devices on their satellite communication array. The resulting detonation cut Vargas off from his support elements outside Clearwater, forcing him to rely on less secure local communications that Cole's team could more easily monitor. By mid-afternoon, a dust storm had moved in from the desert, a common occurrence in this region, but one that further complicated the cartel's operations while providing additional cover for the defenders. Visibility dropped to less than 100 meters, forcing the cartel to tighten their perimeter and abandon their wider sweep. Cole used the opportunity to regroup his forces at their secondary command post, a reinforced basement beneath the feed store. The men arrived in 2s and 3s, dust coating their equipment, but morale still high. Despite being outnumbered, they had effectively stalled the cartel's advance while inflicting significant casualties. "Status report," Cole said as the last team arrived. "East Sector holding," reported Williams. "They've pulled back to defensive positions around the gas station. 5 vehicles disabled, unknown casualties. North Sector contained," added Tanner. "They attempted to establish a forward base at the school but withdrew after we engaged their flank. 3 confirmed kills, several wounded." Similar reports came in from the other sectors. The veterans had bloodied the cartel forces significantly while maintaining their own freedom of movement. But Cole knew this was just the first phase of what would be a longer conflict. The cartel had resources to call on that would eventually overwhelm the town's defenders if reinforcements didn't arrive. As if reading his thoughts, the satellite phone vibrated. "QREF is mobile," came the terse message. "ETA now 2 hours. Can you hold?" "We'll hold," Cole replied with quiet certainty. He turned to his men, noting the fatigue beginning to show on even these hardened veterans. 2 hours, he told them. We need to maintain pressure while conserving strength. Selective engagements only, priority on their command and control assets. The radio scanner monitoring cartel communications suddenly crackled with increased activity. Colonel Vargas was issuing new orders, reorganizing his forces for what sounded like a concentrated push rather than the previous dispersed sweep. They're adapting again, Cole observed. Concentrating force for a decisive engagement rather than continuing to chase shadows. Through the scanner, they could hear Vargas directing his men to establish blocking positions around what he identified as key terrain, the elevated areas of town that offered tactical advantages. It was a sound strategy that indicated his professional training. By securing these positions, he could establish interlocking fields of fire that would limit the defenders' mobility. He's boxing us in, Delgado noted, studying the map where they marked the cartel's new positions. Cole nodded, and forcing us to either confront him directly or cede the high ground. He studied the map for a moment longer, then made his decision. We let him have it. The veterans exchanged glances, understanding the apparent contradiction in Cole's strategy. Surrendering key terrain went against basic tactical doctrine. We give him what he expects, Cole continued, while preparing what he doesn't. He indicated several locations on the map, drainage culverts, maintenance tunnels, and subbasements that ran beneath the very positions Vargas was moving to occupy. He's thinking conventionally, control the high ground, dominate the battlefield. We go low instead. Hit him from beneath his own positions. The plan was audacious but sound. While the cartel secured what they thought were defensible positions, Cole's team would infiltrate the underlying infrastructure and strike from unexpected vectors. As the veterans prepared for this new phase, the dust storm intensified, reducing visibility to near zero at times. The howling wind masked sounds of movement, allowing Cole's team to reposition without detection. They moved through the tunnels and drainage systems, placing explosive charges at structural weak points beneath the cartel's new strongholds. Cole led a three-man element through the oldest section of tunnels, narrow passages dating back to Prohibition that ran directly beneath what had once been Clearwater's original town hall and was now serving as Vargas's forward command post. Decades of military experience guided his movements. The same silent approach he had used to infiltrate Taliban compounds now deployed in defense of American soil. Through gaps in the aging floorboards above, Cole could see Vargas and his lieutenants gathered around maps, planning their next move. The Colombian colonel was visibly frustrated, gesturing angrily as he demanded explanations for their lack of progress. Cole placed his charges carefully, not to collapse the building, which would be a war crime against combatants who might surrender, but to breach the floor in specific locations that would create maximum disruption while offering his team entry points for a surprise assault. With the charges set, Cole and his team withdrew to safe distance and coordinated with the other elements, now similarly positioned beneath cartel strongpoints throughout town. The timing would be critical, simultaneous breaches across multiple locations to create confusion and the impression of a much larger attacking force. All elements in position, came the confirmation over their secure channel. Execute on my mark, Cole responded. 3, 2, 1, mark. The coordinated detonations shook Clearwater with a thunderous roar that even the howling dust storm couldn't mask. Beneath the cartel's carefully selected strongpoints, the ground gave way in controlled breaches, not catastrophic collapses, but precisely engineered entry points. Cole's team surged upward through the breach, emerging into Vargas's command center amid smoke and falling debris. The surprise was complete. The cartel leadership had never considered an attack from below. In the confined space, Cole's years of close quarters combat training became evident. His movements were economical yet devastatingly effective, disarming the nearest guard with a fluid motion that left the man unconscious, then directing suppressive fire that forced Vargas and his lieutenants to take cover behind overturned furniture. "Colonel Vargas," Cole called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. "Your position is compromised. Your communications are severed. Your forces are isolated and under attack across all sectors. Surrender now. Vargas's response was predictably defiant. A burst of gunfire toward Cole's position and a string of curses in Spanish. Cole had expected nothing less from a man with professional military pride. The fight that followed was brief but intense. Vargas and his remaining guards fought with the skill of trained operators, but they were disoriented by the unexpected attack vector and hampered by the confined space. Cole's team had the advantage of preparation and initiative, the critical elements in any close-quarters engagement. Within minutes, 2 of Vargas's lieutenants were down with non-lethal wounds, while the third had surrendered. The colonel himself remained defiant, cornered behind an overturned metal desk, his sidearm still in hand. "There are more of us coming," Vargas shouted. "You think this is our main force? We have hundreds more across the border, ready to move. You've accomplished nothing." Cole advanced methodically, maintaining cover while closing the distance. "Maybe," he acknowledged, "but you won't be leading them." In a final desperate move, Vargas lunged from cover, weapon raised. Cole's response was instinctive, 2 controlled shots that incapacitated without killing, driving Vargas back to the floor with a shoulder wound and a leg hit that shattered his femur. As Cole secured the colonel's weapon, similar reports came in from across town. Coordinated breaches had successfully disrupted the cartel's command structure at multiple locations. Without central direction, their forces had fragmented into isolated pockets, no longer functioning as a coordinated military unit. "All teams, consolidate and secure prisoners," Cole ordered. "Set up hasty ambush positions for any counterattack." The veterans moved with practiced efficiency, zip-tying prisoners and establishing defensive positions around their breach points. Outside, the dust storm continued to rage, providing natural concealment for their operations. Cole knelt beside the wounded Vargas, applying a pressure bandage to his shoulder while maintaining a watchful eye. The colonel's face was contorted with pain and rage, but his eyes still burned with defiance. "Your Ranger regiment," Vargas said, noting details in Cole's movements and tactics that only another professional would recognize. "Afghanistan." "Among other places," Cole replied, his focus on treating the wound rather than conversation. Vargas laughed bitterly. "So now you fight your own kind. I trained with American Special Forces at Fort Bragg. Learned from the best, just like you." "Then you should have known better than to bring war to American soil," Cole responded, tightening the bandage with perhaps more force than strictly necessary. "War." Vargas's laugh turned into a grimace of pain. "This isn't war. This is business. Your government runs exercises against imaginary enemies while the real threat walks in through the front door. We've been establishing networks across your country for years, not just for drugs, but for power. Military power." Cole's expression remained impassive, but he was cataloging every word. This confirmed what they had suspected upon finding the weapons cache. The cartel wasn't just expanding drug operations, but establishing paramilitary capability within U.S. borders. "The weapons we found," Cole said. "Who were they for?" Vargas's eyes narrowed, calculating what to reveal. "Cells in 6 major cities. Ex-military like me, recruited from across Latin America. Professional soldiers who go where the money is. The cartels learned that drugs are vulnerable to market forces, but security services, protection, enforcement, controlled territory, that's stable revenue." The satellite phone vibrated at Cole's hip. "QREF is 30 minutes out," came the terse message. "Secure LZ at Southern Field." Cole acknowledged the transmission and turned back to Vargas. "Your men have 2 options. Surrender to us now and face American justice, or wait for the military response force that's incoming and face whatever comes next." He keyed his radio, connecting to the cartel's captured communication equipment. "Attention, all cartel forces. Your leadership has been captured. Colonel Vargas is in custody. U.S. military forces are inbound. Lay down your weapons and assemble in the town square with hands visible. This is your only warning. The message was met with confused chatter across the cartel frequencies, followed by the sound of vehicles starting and urgent commands in Spanish. Through observation points, Cole's veterans reported cartel forces abandoning positions and falling back toward their vehicles. "They're not surrendering," Tanner reported. "They're bugging out." At least 30 vehicles moving south toward the border. Cole wasn't surprised. Without their leadership and faced with the prospect of confronting U.S. military forces, the cartel operators were making the rational choice to withdraw while they could. "Let them go," Cole ordered. "Our priority is securing the town and protecting civilians, not pursuing retreating forces." As the cartel elements fled Clearwater, Cole's team consolidated their prisoners, 23 in total, including Vargas and 4 of his key lieutenants. The wounded were treated with the same care as the defenders' own casualties, their weapons secured and documented for the inevitable investigation that would follow. Outside, the dust storm began to subside, revealing a town that bore the scars of urban combat: bullet holes in walls, damaged vehicles, shell casings littering the streets. But unlike Hartsville and other communities that had fallen under cartel control, Clearwater remained free, its people battered but unbroken. Cole coordinated the establishment of a landing zone in the field south of town, marking its perimeter with chemical lights that would guide the incoming helicopters. As the first faint thump of rotor blades became audible, he stood on the edge of the field, watching the approaching aircraft with the stoic expression of a man who had seen too many battlefields to be moved by either victory or aftermath. The Blackhawks landed with precision, disgorging teams of special operations personnel in full combat gear. The unit commander, a major whom Cole recognized from joint operations years earlier, approached with a mixture of professional respect and cautious formality. "Quite a situation you have here," the major said, surveying the scene as his men established a perimeter. "Preliminary reports said cartel activity, but this looks more like an invasion." "That's exactly what it was," Cole replied. "We have prisoners secured at these locations, including their commander, a former Colombian Special Forces officer named Vargas. They were setting up more than just drug operations. This was a forward operating base for paramilitary activities deeper inside the U.S. The major nodded, his expression grave. "We've been tracking similar patterns across the border region, but nothing this bold. You've given us a valuable intelligence windfall." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Off the record, you did good work here. Not many civilian communities could have held against a force like this." "We're not exactly typical civilians," Cole responded with characteristic understatement. As the military units secured the town and began processing prisoners, Cole walked slowly back toward Main Street. The veterans who had fought alongside him were helping residents emerge from shelter, reuniting families, and beginning the process of assessing damage. Sheriff Wilson was coordinating with newly arrived state police, while Doc Martinez continued treating injured townspeople at his clinic. Cole found himself standing before his hardware store, its windows shattered and walls pockmarked with bullet holes. The building could be repaired, the inventory replaced. What mattered was that Clearwater had survived, not just physically, but as a community that had proven its resilience against an overwhelming threat. Frank Delgado approached, looking exhausted but satisfied. Border Patrol just called in. They intercepted most of the retreating cartel forces at the checkpoint. Between our prisoners and theirs, Los Hierros just lost most of their operational leadership and about 100 trained personnel. Cole nodded, absorbing this information without visible reaction, though he understood its significance. The cartel had suffered a devastating blow, not just a tactical defeat, but a strategic setback that would ripple through their entire organization. "What happens now?" Delgado asked, gesturing toward the military and law enforcement presence that had descended on their previously quiet town. Cole watched as residents began emerging in greater numbers, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence as they reclaimed their streets. Children were being guided back to homes, neighbors were checking on one another, and the first tentative efforts at cleanup were already underway. Now, Cole said quietly, we rebuild. But even as he spoke, his mind was processing Vargas's words about cells in major cities and the stockpiled weapons meant for distribution. The battle for Clearwater was over, but it had revealed a larger war that was just beginning, one that would eventually reach far beyond this small border town. As the sun began to set over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the battle-scarred streets, Cole recognized the familiar weight of responsibility settling once again on his shoulders. He had come to Clearwater seeking peace after a lifetime of war, only to find that sometimes the war follows you home. And when it does, you stand and fight, not for some distant objective or strategic goal, but for your home, your community, and the future they represent. In that moment, surrounded by the town he had helped save, Cole Emmerson finally understood that he had never truly left the battlefield behind. He had simply found a cause more worthy of his skills than any he had served before. 3 days after the battle, Clearwater began to resemble itself again. The military presence had diminished to a small security detail guarding the captured cartel members until their transfer to federal custody. State police had established checkpoints on the main roads, but these were staffed by officers who smiled and waved at local vehicles rather than the threatening cartel gunmen who had previously controlled movement. Cole stood on Main Street, supervising the replacement of his hardware store's shattered windows. The physical repairs were straightforward: broken glass replaced, bullet holes patched, inventory restocked. The deeper restoration of the town's sense of security would take longer. Sheriff Wilson approached, looking more rested than he had in days. Just got word from the feds. They're moving Vargas and the other high-value prisoners to a secure facility tomorrow. Sounds like they're getting a lot of intelligence from them. Cole nodded, unsurprised. Men like Vargas rarely maintained silence once their power was stripped away and the full weight of federal charges became apparent. What about the weapons cache? ATF took control of everything. They're tracing serial numbers, trying to establish the supply chain. Wilson hesitated, then added quietly, "The word I'm hearing is that this was bigger than anyone realized. Similar caches have been discovered in 3 other border towns since we broke this one open." The confirmation of Vargas's claims about wider operations wasn't unexpected, but it confirmed the significance of what they had stumbled upon in Clearwater. The cartel hadn't just been expanding drug operations. They had been establishing a paramilitary infrastructure inside American borders. "The town council's calling a special meeting tonight," Wilson continued. "They want to thank you publicly for organizing the defense." Cole shook his head. "Not necessary. Just doing what needed to be done." Wilson smiled slightly. "That's what I told them you'd say. Still, people want to express their gratitude. This town would be under cartel control right now if not for you and the others." As Wilson walked away, Cole returned to supervising the repairs. His preference for anonymity wasn't false modesty. It was the ingrained habit of a man who had spent most of his career operating in shadows. Recognition had never been his motivation, not in Afghanistan and not here in Clearwater. By mid-afternoon, a steady stream of residents had visited the hardware store, ostensibly to purchase supplies for their own repairs, but really to thank Cole personally. He accepted their gratitude with quiet dignity, deflecting praise to the other veterans who had fought alongside him and to the townspeople who had shown courage during the crisis. Emma Peterson and her mother were among the visitors, bringing a home-baked pie and tears of gratitude. The teenager who had nearly been taken by the cartel now stood straighter, her eyes reflecting a new maturity born from confronting danger and witnessing her community's resilience. "Mr. Emerson," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident on her face, "I wanted to thank you. Not just for stopping those men that day, but for everything that came after. For saving our town." Cole accepted the pie with a nod of acknowledgement. "It wasn't just me. Everyone played their part. But you showed us how," Emma's mother added. "You showed us that we don't have to accept being victims, that we can stand up even against terrible odds." After they left, Cole stood in his partially repaired store, reflecting on the woman's words. The transformation he was witnessing wasn't just the physical rebuilding of Clearwater. but a psychological restoration, a community rediscovering its strength and unity in the aftermath of threat. That evening, despite his reluctance, Cole attended the town council meeting. The community center had been quickly repaired after the fighting, with only a few bullet holes in the exterior walls hinting at its recent role as a battlefield. Inside, the room was packed with residents, families reunited after evacuation, business owners taking stock of damages, and the veterans who had formed the backbone of the town's defense. Mayor Hendricks, still somewhat shell-shocked by the events but making a visible effort to provide leadership, called the meeting to order. We've gathered tonight to begin the process of rebuilding Clearwater, not just physically but as a community. Before we discuss specific recovery plans, I believe we owe a profound debt of gratitude to those who prevented our town from falling under cartel control. He gestured toward Cole and the other veterans seated in various parts of the room. These men, our neighbors, friends, and fellow citizens, put their lives on the line to protect us all. They used skills acquired in service to our nation to defend our homes when no immediate help was available. The room erupted in applause, people rising to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation. Cole remained seated, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its importance for the community's healing process. When the applause finally subsided, the mayor continued with practical matters, damage assessments, insurance claims, security arrangements. The town would receive state emergency funds for rebuilding, and various federal agencies had offered assistance programs for affected businesses. As the meeting progressed to open discussion, Jorge Ramirez, the gas station owner who had been taken hostage, stood to speak, his face still bearing the bruises from his captivity. I have owned my business in Clearwater for 22 years, he began, his voice carrying the slight tremor of emotional aftermath. Never did I imagine facing what we have just experienced. But I have learned something important from this ordeal, that we are stronger together than we ever realized. He turned to face Cole directly. Some of us knew that men like Mr. Emerson and others had military backgrounds, but we never truly understood what that meant until now. They brought not just fighting skills, but organization, leadership, and courage when we needed it most. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as Jorge continued. I propose that we formalize what began as an emergency response. Clearwater should establish a community defense initiative, train volunteers who can respond to future threats, whether from criminals or natural disasters. The suggestion sparked immediate discussion, with various residents offering support and suggestions. Sheriff Wilson spoke about coordination with law enforcement, while Doc Martinez addressed medical response capabilities. Frank Delgado outlined basic security training that could be provided to interested community members. Throughout the discussion, Cole remained silent, observing the transformation unfolding before him. What had begun as a crisis response was evolving into something more permanent, a community taking responsibility for its own security rather than assuming that distant authorities would always arrive in time. When finally called upon to speak, Cole's words were few but impactful. What happened here wasn't about military training or tactical expertise. It was about people standing together against those who threatened their homes and families. That's something any community can do with the right preparation and mindset. After the meeting, as people lingered to discuss specific recovery projects, Cole stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air was cool and clear, the stars visible above Clearwater with a brilliance only possible in small desert towns far from big city light pollution. Frank Delgado joined him, lighting a cigarette as he leaned against the building. "Never thought I'd be fighting a war on Main Street, USA," he said after a moment of companionable silence. "Not a war we chose," Cole replied, "but one we had to finish." Delgado nodded, exhaling smoke that dissipated in the night breeze. "You know they'll be back eventually. Maybe not Los Hierros specifically, but someone. The border's too valuable, and Clearwater's still sitting in a strategic location. They'll find a different town next time," Cole said with quiet certainty. "One that isn't prepared." The two veterans stood in silence for a moment longer, both understanding what had changed in Clearwater. The town would never again be the quiet, overlooked community it had once been. It had been tested by fire and had emerged transformed, more vigilant, more united, more resilient. Days turned into weeks as the town's recovery continued. The visible scars of battle gradually faded, bullet holes patched, broken windows replaced, damaged vehicles repaired or removed. Less visible but equally important was the psychological healing taking place as residents processed their experiences and found meaning in their collective response to threat. Cole's hardware store resumed normal operations, though customers now often sought his advice on security measures and emergency preparations along with their usual purchases of tools and supplies. He provided guidance without elaboration, helping people make their homes more secure without feeding unproductive fear or paranoia. The community defense initiative that Jorge had proposed took shape under Sheriff Wilson's oversight, with veterans like Delgado, Williams, and Tanner providing basic training in security awareness, emergency response, and community coordination. It wasn't a militia in the conventional sense, but rather a structured volunteer organization focused on overall community resilience. State and national media descended on Clearwater briefly, attracted by the dramatic story of a small town that had repelled a cartel incursion. Cole avoided interviews, as did most of the veterans, redirecting reporters to Sheriff Wilson and Mayor Hendricks, who provided carefully measured accounts that emphasized community cooperation rather than individual heroics. 1 month after the battle, as life in Clearwater settled into a new normal, Cole received visitors at his ranch house outside town. The intelligence gathered from the prisoners and captured materials has proven invaluable in our ongoing operations against cartel expansion. Cole listened without comment as they outlined the broader significance of what had happened in Clearwater, how it had exposed a coordinated effort by cartels to establish paramilitary capabilities within U.S. borders, complete with weapons caches, trained personnel, and infrastructure. We've disrupted 6 similar operations in the past month, the younger agent explained, all based on intelligence that stemmed from what you uncovered here. Frankly, they offered him a position as a consultant, using his expertise to help identify vulnerable communities and train local law enforcement in counter-cartel tactics. Cole declined politely but firmly. His days of official government service were behind him. His commitment now was to Clearwater and the life he had built there. After the agents departed, Cole stood on his porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold. The entire community seemed to have turned out for the event, transforming it from a simple business reopening into a celebration of recovery and resilience. As Cole entered, conversations briefly paused as people acknowledged his presence with nods of respect. He took his usual corner table, where Doc Martinez was already seated with his morning coffee and medical journal. "Town feels different," Martinez observed as Cole sat down. Cole nodded, understanding exactly what the doctor meant. Clearwater had changed, not just physically, but in its collective identity. There was a new confidence in how people carried themselves, a deeper connection between neighbors who had faced danger together. "Good different," Cole replied after a moment. "The Community Defense Initiative is coming along," Martinez continued. 40 volunteers so far, with more signing up each week. Sheriffs organizing them into teams based on skills and location. Cole had deliberately maintained distance from the initiative's formation, concerned that his involvement might shape it too much in a military direction rather than allowing it to develop organically from the community's needs and capabilities. "Wilson's doing it right," he acknowledged, keeping the focus on preparedness and community support, not turning people into vigilantes. Their conversation was interrupted as Tyler James approached the table, now wearing a volunteer badge from the community center where he had been helping coordinate recovery efforts. "Mr. Emerson," the teenager said with newfound confidence, "the mayor asked if you could stop by the town hall later. They're finalizing plans for the memorial service this weekend." The memorial would honor the 2 townspeople who had lost their lives during the cartel occupation, Jorge's assistant at the gas station who had resisted the initial takeover, and an elderly man who had suffered a heart attack during the evacuation. Their sacrifices were part of Clearwater's transformation story, sobering reminders of the real cost of standing against violence. As Tyler left, Martinez studied Cole with the perceptive gaze of someone trained to observe physical and psychological indicators. "You've changed too, you know. Found your place here in a new way." Cole didn't respond immediately, reflecting on the doctor's observation. The events of the past month had indeed shifted something fundamental in his relationship with Clearwater. What had begun as a place of retirement, a quiet corner to process the memories of war, had become something more meaningful. The skills and experiences he had once sought to leave behind had found purpose in protecting this community. 2 months after the battle for Clearwater, the town gathered in the newly restored community center for a memorial service. Fresh paint covered the repaired bullet holes, and the building that had once been a battlefield now served again as the heart of community life. Rows of folding chairs filled quickly as residents arrived, their faces solemn but resolute. Cole stood at the back, preferring to observe rather than occupy one of the seats of honor that had been reserved for the veterans who had defended the town. He watched as families entered, parents with children, elderly couples supporting each other, teenagers who seemed to have aged years in the past months. Their quiet strength confirmed what he had come to understand. Clearwater's true defense had never been just the veterans with combat experience, but the collective will of a community that refused to surrender its home. Mayor Hendricks opened the ceremony with words that acknowledged both loss and triumph. The 2 townspeople who had died were honored with photographs, personal remembrances, and a moment of silence that filled the room with palpable emotion. As the formal service concluded, Sheriff Wilson unveiled a simple plaque that would be installed in the town square, in memory of those lost and in honor of those who stood. "Clearwater endures." The phrase captured the essential truth of what had happened. Not just resistance against an external threat, but a deeper commitment to sustaining the community itself through whatever challenges might come. Cole slipped out before the social gathering that followed, preferring the quiet of evening as he walked down Main Street. The physical scars of battle had been largely erased, but the town would never be exactly as it was before. Something fundamental had shifted, a newfound awareness of both vulnerability and strength. He reached his hardware store, now fully restored and operating normally. The routine of daily commerce had resumed, but with an underlying vigilance that manifested in small ways. Improved security measures, community alert systems, regular meetings of the Volunteer Defense Organization. The cartel's defeat was undeniable. Los Hierros had lost its leadership cadre, its weapons cache, and its foothold in the region. Federal operations sparked by intelligence from Clearwater had disrupted similar efforts across 3 states, pushing back against the cartel's ambitious expansion. Though some questioned the extent of Cole's actions, most celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation. Cole, humble yet firm, quietly stepped back from the limelight, continuing duties without fanfare, steadfast in moral clarity. As he locked up the store and headed toward his truck, Cole noticed Emma Peterson walking home from her after-school job, moving with newfound confidence. She waved, and he nodded in response, a simple acknowledgement between citizens who had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Driving back to his ranch house as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Cole reflected on the transformation he had witnessed in Clearwater. The town had discovered what soldiers learn in combat, that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage when defending what matters most. His story stands as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.